What's going on, workforce? Brian and Chris here, and today we're diving into a discussion topic over on Reddit saying, where is all the homogenization? Link will be in the description, guys. Go check out the post for yourself. Feel free to weigh in. You can see here it's clearly highly voted. It's been posted last week at 0. I upvoted it, and it's still sitting at a 0 post. So I thought we would bring this up for discussion. Chris, why don't you go ahead and take us through the OP here, and then we'll break it down.
Obviously, it's at 0 because everybody just already agrees on this topic, and everybody is perfectly happy with all job balances and job changes in the game every single time we get them.
All the time.
So there's no reason to upvote this because we're all like, yeah, I got it. But if this were to be a polarizing topic, the question would be that they see this viewpoint thrown up all around and it's just presented as fact. I play physical ranged. This person, not Brian and I. It's one of the few roles we don't have any 90s at.
Suck it, Bard.
We've been told we hate Bard, so we're just going to own that. Thank you. We didn't know what job we hated, but now we do. We appreciate the community letting us know. And we have played the role from ARR, and I have seen the changes throughout the years. All the roles still feel different to play. Melee, all feel differently to play. Casters, all feel different. Tanks feel different, maybe with the exception of Dark Knight and Warrior. I haven't leveled Dark Knight this latest expansion, so that may have even changed. Healers are the one thing I can see being homogenized if you focus on their DPS single button moves, I assume is the subtext there. So what are people talking about with all this homogenization?
Well, I think it's essentially, for me as a longtime player, it just continues to feel like the jobs have kind of moved in that direction. I think what I would say is in terms of healers, with the fact that they went with the barrier and the pure healer, I do feel that there is more uniqueness in terms of like healers in terms like of what they can offer, but in terms of damage and attack overall, like it is, here's your dot, here's your hit, here's your AoE, here's your job specific thing. And so it just has gotten overly, like when I say overly simplified, I mean that I then go and again, I've been loving the PvP. I go and step into PvP and I'm like, oh my gosh, like all the jobs feel so unique. They feel so unique. And then I start to wonder, has homogenization come into play because we've continued to expand? Like my PvE bars, and guys, you should go sub to JRPG, Ginger JRPG, because I just released some controller guides this week. Hopefully you guys enjoy PvE ones. I've also got the PvP too. But oh my gosh, like being that we've gotten all these skills, I'm like doing the controller guides has gotten way more challenging despite some quality of life that has come in over the course of the time since I started doing them around the end of Heaven's Word, in that regards, as people would challenge me to do like different things like, hey, I really can't figure out this job on a hop. And that's how Work the Game kind of got, discovered in that regards. But that was just one of the many things that we've done. So when you go to the PvP though, like you have like a set number, you have a certain set of skills, that does, I feel, make the jobs actually feel way more unique and defined. And so I actually like where they saying they're not seeing the homogenization. Like I can't not see the homogenization even more so now than I have before. I mean, obviously each one isn't a carbon copy. It isn't like I'm casting in the same rotations. There are obviously skill priorities. There's obviously stat priorities that are different. Like if we just look at Red Mage, Summoner, and Black Mage, I do feel like those are unique even on the PvE side, especially having leveled them. I actually really adore all of them and how they play, and I struggle with which one I want to play more right now. But still beyond that, tank stance is a tank stance. You have a gap closer. Like they're named differently and they might have a different kind of order, but over the course, in my opinion, over the last 6-7 years, they really have kind of like, it doesn't, you're not like at a disadvantage. And so not all homogenization's bad, because you don't want to sit here and have a job that's like, we don't do Paladin, because we had that happened. That was the thing. I remember making a guide on Paladin and someone who said, how dare you? Paladin is garbage. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, but games get updated. And then like literally the next patch, Paladin was top tier because the next patch was Stormblood. So they fixed a lot of the stuff with the job. So it's like, that's my experience with it. Chris, what's your take here?
I think PvP versus PvE really shows both why you want homogenization and why you don't. PvP is an opportunity for the jobs to be as they picture themselves in their dreams. It's this ability to truly lean into what makes them unique, because at the end of the day, you're balanced against other players, and the outcome is less predicted. It is much more sandbox, and so the ability for players to behave differently, the way the classes interact with each other, becomes really fundamentally important, as opposed to static PvE content. The boss has one set of skills, the boss has one amount of life, and needs to be cleared, and is designed to be cleared. So when you talk about PvE, remember that in PvE, all bosses, open world or in an instance, all things are designed to die. They are designed to be beaten. Winning on the player's behalf is the dev's objective. They are not trying to put anything in the game that cannot be beaten. Now, they are asking various levels of skills across those players, everything from MSQ, where they're like, you know what, if you're just at your keyboard and you're trying to play, we want you to get through it, all the way up to Ultimate, where we expect this to take you a long time because that's the group of players we're appealing to, but it is still designed to be doable and to die. And when they play test it, their goal is to make sure that it can be cleared. So within that, you have to balance it, because one of the objectives of Yoshi P is that regardless of platform, regardless of class, regardless of region that you live in, regardless of language that you speak, regardless of anything about you, if you want to work hard to clear a piece of content, Yoshi P wants it to be clearable. And that means that if every class needs to be able to be eligible to be in a group with an ultimate clear, then every class needs to be capable of pulling its weight in an ultimate. And so you have to design the ultimate where there is now the ultimate is restricting the classes and the classes are restricting the ultimate. The ultimate cannot ask anything of a healer that all 4 healers cannot individually pull their weight on, or that healer suddenly becomes not welcome in ultimate groups. Oh, well, if you have a Sage, you have to have this one button, and the other 3 healers all have a button that fills that need, but the Sage doesn't have that, so you just can't bring Sages. Or if you do bring a Sage, you have to bring the most powerful healer against this piece of content to make up for them, which nobody wants.
Right. Usually we see that happen a lot in that where it's like, oh, you're 20% less efficient. It's going to be easier if we don't have to ask everybody else to make up for your deficiency. You're cut, and that's where and this is where difficult content actually comes more into play as opposed to more casual content. And what you do also see, like, especially in terms of like some of the PvE, like when you start getting into Boja as a classic example, it opens it up self to more choice, like you can take these skills over those skills, because it actually is a little bit more flexible and it isn't so much focusing in on the hardest piece of content that what some people call pinnacle. Some people look at rating and like ultimates as the pinnacle form. Some people call it glamour. Everybody is going to approach an MMO and kind of have a pinnacle form, the thing of what they actually appreciate. Some people it's fishing. Anyway, I cut you off. I want to let you finish your thought.
So I would say that, like, if you want to look to a game that can afford to let class identity outpace homogenization, I would say go look at World of Warcraft, where they've let individual specializations on their jobs. They have roughly a dozen classes, and each class has roughly 3 specs. And so that means that they end up with kind of in that ballpark of 40 specializations. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. Somebody in chat will. And so across these like 40 specs, there are raid tiers where an individual specialization is not welcome in raid groups. And that is because they have allowed that class's identity to shift so far that it shifts wildly out of balance. And it's really hard to balance 40 individual identities. It is much easier to balance them when you simplify them. So homogenization is heavily evident in our gearing system, where effectively the base gear is nearly identical across an entire role. Like the tank gear is very, very similar from tank to tank when you compare like the different specializations in Guild Wars or the different specializations in WoW to 14, where like you've got kind of like basically 2 sets of gear making up the entire set, and then there's some minor adjustments to materia melding, but there isn't this like, oh, well, I have to go farm this dungeon because I'm a Dark Knight and there's this chess piece, but then Paladin has this other chess piece, but then I play Warrior, so it's this other chess piece, but then I got these legs and that adjusts to the Gunbreaker's chess piece. No, we don't have that. Our gearing system is very, very, very simplified. And then we have like a base set of rules. So sticking to tanks, all tanks have a tank stance, all tanks have a provoke, all tanks have an invuln, all tanks have a ranged attack that doesn't break combos, all tanks have a gap closer. And so there's these base set of homogenized things. And that means that if they ever add another tank to the game, when they add that tank and they come up with it, say it's something really cool. Oh, this is going to be the Dragon Slayer. Okay, well, what are the rules of the Dragon Slayer? Before we even talk about theme and what it would be cool if Dragon Slayers did, step one, give it a tank stance, give it a provoke, give it, it's going to have access to the roll abilities, obviously. Give it an invuln, give it a gap closer, give it a ranged attack, give it a 2-button combo and a 2-button AoE combo to start. That is its base. And then from there, we can ask, okay, what makes it unique? So the homogenization has to exist because every dungeon, raid, trial they add to the game has to be clearable with all 20 classes.
Well, it also has to be clearable with the matchmaking in that regards, right? So
Yes.
and one of the reasons why you actually see this happening, especially as modern games, and the answer is that like if you go and sit here and say, hey, well, we can make it more unique and have these flavors, like all of a sudden you're like, well, what's the cost? The cost ends up being like also matchmaking as a thing, because what happens if you get matched in with the tank that can't have a tank, that doesn't have a tank stance or this or that, and now you can't clear it. You've now effectively, that would be a perk to Final Fantasy XIV's 4-player dungeon size, so you're not wasting as many people's time. But it's still at its core, like you don't want to sit here and get pulled into like a dungeon and your healer doesn't have heal. It's still a risk. They don't have to have it equipped. They don't have to use it. They could still like just suck as a player. But
Sure.
That's the reality, that some people suck, and we accept that and move on with our lives. But when you look at matchmaking, it's one of the things that is like, okay, yeah, it not only does it need to be cleared, but how does that get set up? It's like, oh, we're gonna roll the dice and you're gonna get a team and you're going to go try to clear that content, and matchmaking becomes even harder the harder the content is. And so it is a cost of doing business in this regards. Now, note this self, anybody who's new here, I'm actually not defending it. It's something that I've talked about immensely as somebody, as a dad who uses matchmaking because of its efficiency. I have a better time when I don't use matchmaking and form a static group and we melt the things down, as opposed to like, all right, I'll just write this matchmaking kind of thing. So it's like there's pros and cons, and it's something that, like, being that it's core baked into it, yeah, it's gonna be that is gonna be what it is. I would love to see, like, the one, like, if we were gonna say, Brian, what would you change? And in this case, it's gonna be focusing on a specific piece of content. Like, let's say the new Deep Dungeon comes out. What I would say is that instead of changing the overall game, because that's just an insane amount of work, not going to happen, don't want to set false expectations, but let's say a new piece of content. It's PvE content, it's got its own progression system.
Criterion dungeons, whatever.
Exactly. One of two things. Like, bring in the ability to pick a sub job just for the heck of it, just for fun. Just
Lost
to say,
Actions did this.
Lost Actions exactly did this, ish. But in my mind, it doesn't always have to be action-based. I would love to see where it's like, oh, your sub job adds a buff, a trait to your abilities, and that way it, like, you could end up in a way keeping it pretty simple. You're like, okay, well, you can sub job, but like, the role depending on you pick is going to end up having an effect on your, now in Suna, for example, you sub job tank, it's going to add a shield just for the hell of it, like, just to modify the existing skill set to keep your hotbars from blowing up and being nuts. Or have gear that is driven from that content that has, like, perks and traits on it that augment your skills, like, or like a materia that's specific to that piece of content that like, that would be something cool. Whether it's skills, I always kind of default to traits right now with PvE because my hotbars are so filled, and that's maybe a discussion that we can have next week, talking about, like, all right, let's get into 7.0. Like, should we bring in the PvP, combo system to kind of clean up some of these hotbars and still remain and have a unique flavor for these jobs? That will be a discussion probably next week.
It's what I hoped that WoW's roguelike Shadowlands piece, Torghast, was going to do, where you would add something. Imagine to Black Mage if you added something where when a Black Mage moves, they regain mana. That's it. That's all it is. It's a pair of boots, and every time they move, they regain mana. What would that fundamentally do to the Black Mage rotation? It's a minor change. It's passive, but like it fundamentally changes it at a base level. So now a class that likes to sit in turret, it totally ground up changes it. Now, when you're on the move, you're like, oh, wow, I have this kind of unlimited mana. So, and then what if it's based on distance? So what if I run and then I teleport back to my ley lines and it gives me the mana based on that distance covered?
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden, instead of my ice rotation, if I move out of a mechanic and teleport back, I can stay in fire even longer. And so like there starts to be a really big shift there in how that, and then when you layer the way Paradox and all that works, that becomes a fundamentally different class off of that one change. And so you can do that. So when you talk about utility, class identity versus homogenization, it's a spectrum and every game exists on it. And individual games like a God of War or an Elden Ring can let you go all the way to this side. Something like Cyberpunk, where it's like you can just push it as far as you want. But that's because if the game becomes really hard for you or the game becomes really easy for you, it doesn't matter. You're only affecting your experience. You're not making somebody else's dungeon run now impossible.
Right.
The other side is homogenization. That is something where everybody's going to have the exact same opportunity. The closest piece of content in Final Fantasy XIV, I would say, is like the Shirogane jump puzzle. We all have the same jump. We all have this. It's a one button. It doesn't matter your class, your race, none of it matters. We're all solving the same jump puzzle together. And so when you're in those gates and you're watching people jump, nobody has an inherent advantage. It's the same mechanical test. So would you want everybody to have the same one button rotation that does the same thing to the boss and there's no rolls or anything? Or would you want this far into the utility? We really want something in between. I don't want to be so far to this side that some people accidentally get to where they can't clear the content. Now they're in my roulette, and now I'm stuck either carrying them or failing the duty. And I don't want to be on the other end where we're all just bored playing the same game. It's somewhere in between. What I think when I see this conversation brought up is that when we see the game pushing too close to the homogenization side, which makes the game more accessible, makes the game more available to all, allows them to tighter tune things. It has a lot of advantages. What I like to see is some element of the game, like what you're describing, counterbalance, some other side piece of content. So for example, I think the limited job system, I know nobody has an opinion on Blue Mage, but the limited job system on its own is a really neat opportunity to say, great, what if we don't let it go in group content? So we don't have to worry about the can it clear content. If a Blue Mage wants to bring a set of skills where it can't finish the boss,
all right,
that's fine. If a Blue Mage wants to bring something where it one-shots the boss, that's fine too.
Cool.
And so it allows that Blue Mage to define its own identity within Final Fantasy XIV. Most of the frustration of Blue Mage is that identity can be so wildly different than what their expectations were. So like that's what I want to see more of. If we're going to make core PvE content more and more this like refined thing where a certain mechanical skill gets you a certain clear every single time regardless of group comp, then I love that things like Crystal Conflict, deep dungeons, hopefully something like this Criterion dungeon, etc., allow the identity of these jobs to shine. I don't want Crystal Conflict's identity to be brought into PvE, but I don't want PvE to somehow neuter what Crystal Conflict has revealed.
Yeah, exactly. So those are our thoughts. I think essentially it's an interesting topic because like there are some really strong ways on it, but it's interesting because I feel the homogenization, but I don't feel like hamstrung by it. Like I still feel like it's within balance, and I do think that as we continue to look forward, that'll be something maybe we discuss next week, because it's like at the end of the day, like, okay,
yeah,
you're pruning skills or you're doing something. So there's definitely options and things like that we can see them kind of take obviously in the future, etc. But Chris, do you want to take us out?
Yeah. My dog's ready to come in. If you can hear that doorbell in the distant things there. So if you guys are enjoying these discussion topics, or if you like checking in with our weekly coverage, do that. If you're here at this point, I don't know when this is going live, but remember Brian's gotten to play New World against the devs on the 26th, so it's already happened. Go check out his I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on it. And if it hasn't yet happened, keep an eye on our Twitch page on May 26th. Very, very cool. But until then, pray return here at the Waking Sands, where we're discussing things. And thank you guys so much for hanging out. We'll see you next time.
Take care.